Species.
A quick note before we start the show. Normally, when you hit play on one of our episodes, you'll hear Steve talking about his dog or some other hilarious anecdote before we get into some words and phrases. But today, it's going to be a little different. We're going to jump right to an interview with our very special guest, Mr. Barry Popik. He was outstanding, and you're going to get to hear some of that Popik passion that we talk about. Steve and I enjoyed this conversation very much, and we think you will too. So with no further delay, here is our interview with one of our etymology heroes, Barry Popik. I'm very excited to introduce our guest on today's show. If you've listened to this podcast at all, you know who this person is. He's contributed to the Oxford English Dictionary, the Historical Dictionary of American Slang, the Yale Book of Quotations, and Dictionary of Modern Proverbs, just to name a few. He's a noted lexicographer and etymologist who's responsible for uncovering the true origins of terms like the Windy City, hamburger, hot dog, and of course, the Big Apple. Most importantly, though, for us, he's one of our etymology heroes.
Yes. Barry
Popik. Barry, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. My pleasure.
And before we get started into the meat of the conversation, I just want to make sure we are pronouncing your name correctly. Popik.
Yeah, it's Popik. People misspell it all the time. The New York Times misspells it. It's misspelled more than it's spelled correctly.
Okay.
And it's only 5 letters. It's 5 letters, P-O-P-I-K. And I have my website's called barrypopik.com, and it's spelled Barry Popik with a C, P-O-P-I-C-K. It's spelled Barry Popkin. It's spelled Barry Popkick. And so, I try all of them when I do Google searches, and I find, okay, there's another person who spelled it. But it happens.
Well, we're glad to add our own layer because we've mispronounced it as opposed to misspell it. So we've done our share now for you also. And by the way, I was right, Scott. Just say
well,
that too.
I was gonna say one of us has been mispronouncing it for a very long time, and I'm not gonna say who. Yeah. But Steve just spilled the beans, which, by the way, we did an episode on spilled the beans. So anyway, well, let's start with this. Speaking of your website, I just found out that barrypopik.com has been selected by the United States Library of Congress for its inclusion in its internet archives, which to me is astounding. Do you have any thoughts on just the magnitude of that? What does that mean to you?
I have no idea what that means. I got a letter from the Library of Congress. They said, we'd like to use your website. And I said, sure. And so I don't know what they're going to use it for. I have 5,000 entries on food. I know they're interested in food. And of course, the Big Apple. Apple is also a food. So I have no idea what they're going to do. But Library of Congress, whatever they want, they can take.
That's great. I just think it's a great honor because we try to pilfer your knowledge all the time. So now we can do it and say, just like the Library of Congress. It's not just 2 fat guys doing it. We're up there at the Library of Congress now.
Well, one of the things that we love about you is what we call the Popik passion. Like it's very obvious in your work that you keep going and you care a lot about the correct origins of words and phrases, which is what our podcast is all about. And we don't do real research, right? We find people like yourself, and a few other people that we trust and
give credit to.
We always give credit.
Yeah.
Always. And that's why I've mispronounced your name a million times. Actually, Steve, you were getting it wrong at first too. So let's.
I was. Yeah.
It's because you trusted me.
Yeah. We decided to split the difference and figure you'd just be mad at one of us. So Scott took the hit.
Yeah, I'll take the hit on it, but it was my fault. So this is just a long-winded question though, which is, where does that Popik passion come from? When did you really get into wanting to know the true meanings behind these words and phrases?
Well, I always wanted to know the truth. I became a lawyer. I passed the bar. I went to law school, and I thought law was about the truth. And later I found out it really wasn't about the truth. It was about other things, which side has more money and whatever. But I always wanted to find out about the truth. What's going on? Why is the sky blue? Why is water wet? Why, all these questions. I'm not really a scientist, so I can't answer those questions scientifically, but I could answer words and word origins and phrase origins. And my father got me interested in that. He said, "What does this mean? What does that mean?" And I go, "I don't know." And at the time, I was raised in the 60s and the 70s. We didn't have Google. What we'd have to do is we'd have an encyclopedia at home. Okay, maybe that would have the answer. Maybe that wouldn't. We'd have a dictionary at home. Maybe that would have the answer. Maybe that would. Maybe we could go 5 miles and go to a library, and maybe it'll be open. Maybe it'll be closed. Maybe it'll have the books. Maybe it wouldn't. And you watch the TV. Maybe there's ABC, NBC, CBS, and that's all. And it was black and white at the time. So I mean, you talk about ancient days. This was the 60s and the 70s, and he asked like Murphy's Law. Was there a real Murphy? And I go, I don't know, but I'll find out someday, which I sort of did. And he asked questions like Theodore Roosevelt said this, and did he say it? When did he say it? And I go, I don't know. But this Theodore Roosevelt supposedly said, do the best with what you have, where you are, with what you can, and something like that. And I have a version of that on my website. So later, of course, we have the internet. We have Google Groups. Now, of course, you have Facebook. Then we'd have Twitter, which is just amazing. Twitter, now I could find out the exact day, the exact minute, the exact second when something was coined.
Oh, exactly. Right.
So I just need like Big Apple Twitter to go back to the 1920s. But But now we have all these tools, and so the whole ball game has changed within the past 10 years. And now what I do is completely different from what I did in the 90s.
Well, so what I'm hearing you say too, part of it is, I mean, the legwork wasn't really an option. I mean, you had to get out and actually do the work, and you had to be curious enough, and you sort of develop that muscle. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why your website is so great and why we appreciate you so much is, yes, there's more information, right? There's information everywhere, but we don't know what's really true or not always. Now, you bring up Twitter. I mean, I guess to your point there, you can see that this person, this blue check person said this on this date. This is what started this thing. But anyway, it's, we know that if we go to your website, we're going to get the real scoop. So I am curious. I think you did help me with Murphy's Law. That's right. Murphy's Law was one of those confusing ones, do you find though that people find folk etymology so much more satisfying sometimes? Like that's, the dynamic of not us, because we've got that. I hate to compare myself to you because obviously we just ride on your coattails here, but I'm also just as curious. That's why we have a podcast about it, and Steve too. But I think a lot of people just want a satisfying folk etymology. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, well, okay is the big one. Okay, people have thousands and thousands of explanations for okay. And originally it was just a jocular misspelling or spelling of all correct. O meaning all, O-L-L, correct meaning K-O-R-R-E-C-T. But people would say it meant old Kinderhook. And that was used, Old Kinderhook, for the election of 1840. People said it meant zero killed. People said it meant Oral's crackers or something like that. So it would go on and on and on. And until a professor of Columbia finally solved the okay in the 1960s. And later, of course, with the Big Apple, there are so many folk etymologies, and some are nice, some are not so nice. The one I did not like, of course, is the whore etymology.
Right.
That Big Apple came from prostitutes in the early 1800s. Here's a person who just made that up out of thin air. He just totally made it up. He realized that people didn't know what Big Apple meant, where it came from. This was in 1995. He did a website saying we're the Society of New York City History. It came from a whore. And I wrote him, I said, this is not true. You cannot do this. Your website is going to be #1 in Alta Vista. This was even before Google. And people are going to your website and citing it as true, and you can't do this. And he said, well, he didn't reply to me, but he said, well, I'm #1. Why should I take it off? I mean, it's doing gangbusters business. And so I wrote to the Let's Go Guide to New York, and I told them, you're not to say that Big Apple comes from prostitutes, please, And what they did is they said, okay, well, we don't know where it comes from. We'll cite his story, we'll cite your story, and we'll let the readers decide. And I said, no, you can't do that. You can't do it. So that's where I really, really, really got angry with folk etymologies. Some of the other etymologies are somewhat true. People say Big Apple came from jazz musicians. Well, jazz musicians did play a part of it. So I'm not angry with that at all. Obviously, jazz musicians didn't originate it, but they played a part in popularizing the term. So I'm happy with that etymology. But just to make something out of thin air and lie about it and know that people are accepting something that's completely untrue, that's what I don't like. Of course, there are other etymologies. People say that there are 5 boroughs in New York. There are 5 seeds of the apple, or New York looks like an apple. I'm saying, where did these come from? They came from slave codes that no one wrote down, and slave codes. And that was told by the Circle Line. People, the visitors go to New York, they go to the Circle Line. He says, but the real story is the slave codes. And then when I did Big Apple Corner, when I got it passed by the city council, got it passed by the mayor of the city of New York, got a street sign dedicated, I figured it's all over, right? But no, people say, oh, that's the official story. But the real story is the prostitute. No, he said, no, that's not the real story. The real story is the real story. There's no official story and unofficial story. This is the official story. So sometimes folk etymology is fine, but you want the real stuff.
Oh yeah, well, sex sells, and I mean, listen, I think that what we find is, and what you've obviously shown is the true origins are generally much more complex. Like in the fact that you can say, jazz musicians used it. There was a dance or whatever. It was said by whomever, I can't remember her name. Was that
Mae West?
Mae West. But this is where it actually goes back to. But it has nothing to do with a brothel or whatever that thing was. And it's sort of, it's disingenuous and it's not good for people to want to capitalize on that hunger that people have for. So we try to also debunk wherever we can, of course, using your work and others. But yeah, Steve, why don't you tell us a story about when you got sort of tricked by Google on the top search results?
That was me being lazy one time, trying to figure out what a group of raccoons was called. And somebody had done a really good job of having the #1, instead of flurry of bat or murder of crows, someone said that a group of raccoons was called some raccoons. And in my anger, again, this is actually, I had been confronted by a gang of raccoons. That's a whole other story, Barry. I don't want to bore you with that. But I don't have rabies, and I fell for it because I was lazy. Pretty much.
Well, it was the top Well, in fairness to Steve,
it was probably that same guy that was #1 in 1995. He probably did that with the raccoons. So we have a common enemy now, Barry.
That's right.
We have that.
But it was the top Google search result. And to Steve's credit, he got the real answer before we recorded the show. But he said, I almost got tricked on that because you can, it's fun. It was pretty funny though. So before we move on, I want to ask you one more question about the Big Apple, and then I have a few more questions for you if you have time. With the Big Apple situation, it's interesting because I noticed that recently that like this year, I feel like there were a flurry of mentions about the Big Apple this year in articles. I think you were getting some credit, you and Gerald Cohen, is that right?
Yes.
What's driving that? Do you have any idea, or have you noticed that as well? Or is it just one of those things that constantly is going to keep coming up because people hear it and they're curious?
Oh, well, I'm the one who sort of started that because I went through the Morning Telegraph issue by issue looking for Big Apple, these 2 words, needle in a haystack. And what I did is in 1926, I found out that John J. Fitzgerald was in the fairgrounds of New Orleans with Jake Beyer. And they were racing horses. And then an African-American stable, he called him a dusky stable hand, but black, African American, said, "Oh, where are you going from here?" We going to the Big Apple, meaning New York City, meaning the big money tracks. And John J. Fitzgerald liked the phrase, and they would use it. So he was racing horses with Jake Beyer. So I was looking in the winter racing sessions in New Orleans at the fairgrounds, and January 20th, 1920, I found that J.J. Fitzgerald sold a horse to Jake Beyer. So that's the exact time, that's the exact place. January 20th, 1920, it's probably when Big Apple was first said. We don't know because everyone's dead, but that's probably the date. Now, when Big Apple was in print, my friend Gerald Cohn found out in May 3rd, 1921, Big Apple was used in the New York Morning Telegraph. Whether I was the first, when the first thing happens, there's no trumpets. They don't highlight it. They don't say this is the first.
Right.
So I could be wrong. So what I've been trying to do is get the newspaper digitized, but unfortunately, no one wants to pay for that. Newspapers are digitized all over. Every newspaper is digitized except the Morning Telegraph, unfortunately. But the fact is that it's 1920 or 1921 is the 100th anniversary of the Big Apple. So what's happened is my friend at Ben Zimmer, who's a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, did an article, 100th anniversary of the Big Apple for the Wall Street Journal. After that, I wrote to WNYC, and there was a story at WNYC, which is the public radio station for New York City. Then it got on Gothamist, because WNYC owns Gothamist, or they're partners at least with Gothamist. And that's a popular blog about New York City news. And then, which I was completely surprised, it got in the Daily Mail of London. And that was a very, very nice article. So it was in the Daily Mail. Unfortunately, it stopped there. And, I wrote to Saratoga Public Radio of the Capital Region, Albany. And I said, look, WNYC had this story. You should have this story, too, because John J. Fitzgerald is buried in an unmarked grave, still unmarked grave, around Saratoga, New York. They didn't publish the story. I wrote to two newspapers in Saratoga. They've never published the story. I wrote to New Orleans. I wrote to the Times-Picayune. I've been writing to you guys for 27 years. Could you publish the story? It's 100 years old. It's for African. They would not respond to me. I wrote to public radio in New Orleans. They would not respond to me. I wrote to the fairgrounds. I said, look, it's 100 years old. Could you honor the African-American stable hand who worked for the fairgrounds? This would be a nice thing to do. No response. I wrote to them again, and there was no response. So, there's been a flurry of activity, but unfortunately, there's not enough. The things should happen. There should be plaques. There should be, but who knows? I just do the work. I give it away for free. Whatever people do, they do. That's how it works.
Well, hopefully with the anniversary being here, that finally you'll be able to punch through on that, because it's not without lack of effort or passion on your part for getting that out there. So hopefully, maybe this will be part of the breakthrough too, that maybe someone will hear this that needs to hear that, and listen to this show.
Yeah, once we become the biggest podcast in America, which we're
write a letter to the fairgrounds. It's all you have to do. Write a letter to the fairgrounds saying, I will. Why don't you do something? Write a letter to the New York Racing Association. New York Racing Association, the jockeys at Belmont yesterday, they took a knee for George Floyd. Every one of them took a knee for George Floyd. And I'm saying, that's great. Why don't you do something for the African-American who called New York City the Big Apple? This is a horse racing term. They will not do anything.
That is kind of bizarre. The more you think about it, they have every reason to do so. So, hopefully it's one of those things where it's a slow build. You've done all this legwork. It's, Google search results. I don't know how all that works, but with all these articles coming out, people listen, for what it's worth, I looked up trying to find the actual etymology of the Big Apple, and that's how I discovered you, so that was done through Google. So, it can happen. And it's now that's not going to stop people from wanting to use folk etymologies, but also, I don't know, to me, it's just a pretty big deal that your website's going to be archived like that, so that however many years from now, I don't think Alta Vista guy with his stupid story is going to be still standing. So moving from that and the Big Apple, are there any other, idioms or words that you have the most passion for? Like we covered the Big Apple. We haven't covered some of the ones I know that you're a little more known for, but for you personally, are there any that you have sort of almost as much passion for as the Big Apple?
Well, associated with that, of course, is the Big Easy. And so I always wanted to do that. In fact, today I wrote an email to the Drew Brees Foundation, because Drew Brees, quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, he's involved in a racial confrontation right now. And I said, you could do a lot of work. All they have to do is digitize the New Orleans Daily States item from 1960 to 1980. Very, very, very important to the history of New Orleans. Big Easy is probably there. Big Easy was repopularized in the 1960s and 1970s. You see, New York was called the Big Apple in the 1970s. Supposedly, as of that, New Orleans said, well, they're the Big Apple, we're the Big Easy. And a columnist for the New Orleans States item, Betty Gillard, she wrote on the Lanyap column of the States item, and she used Big Easy basically in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And of course, in 1986, 1987 was a movie called The Big Easy that was with Dennis Quaid.
Dennis Quaid
and Ellen Barkin. Yeah, and that's when the term really became popularized. And then finally, the Times-Picayune did an article of where does Big Easy come from. They really didn't answer it. Now, what I was able to find is that there was a Big Easy nightclub. There was a dance hall. It was called a Negro dance hall. In the newspaper, 1911. It burnt down in 1911. I found the exact date, the exact place. It was not in New Orleans. It was in Gretna, which is right across the river. So what I did is I wrote to the mayor of Gretna. I said, look, there has to be a plaque here. You got to do something. There are people associated with this who are still alive. I mean, obviously, the person who owned the Big Easy is dead, but he could have had a son. He could have had a daughter. He could have had a grandson, a granddaughter. These people had large families, and he had an extremely large family. There are people still alive who we should be talking to, and there should be a plaque. And nobody responded, of course, just like with Big Apple. But what happened with Big Easy, it's very interesting. You had the dance hall, then there was absolutely nothing in the 1910s, nothing in the 1920s, nothing in the 1930s, nothing in the 1940s. As I said, when the movie came out, people were saying, what? Big Easy, what? Now, there was a novel, 1971, called The Big Easy, in which the movie sort of was based on, actually was not based on. They completely trashed the novel, did their own story, but they kept the title. It was by James Conaway, and it was called The Big Easy. Now, he was a reporter for the Times Picayune, and he said, I heard it from some African Americans. I was covering the police precinct, and I heard them talking, and they mentioned this term Big Easy. I don't know who they are. I don't know where. But this was in the 1960s, and he said I was around 1966, 1967, maybe even 1965. He wasn't really sure, and people thought, okay, that was the first citation of the Big Easy. No, I found earlier citations of Big Easy, 1960s. I found it in 1964 in a poetry book called New Orleans Blues by Marty Most. Then I found it in 1965 in an African-American publication called Inside New Orleans. Then I found it in 1966 in Newsweek. And in Newsweek in 1966, it says, Big Easy comes from our Negro citizens. And so the first thing I did was I wrote to the mayor of New Orleans, and they were taking away statues for Civil War. And I said, well, there should be a statue for the Big Apple, should be a statue for the Big Easy. You should help me find these people. No response. Nothing.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
What I think happened, I think that there was a nightclub, obviously, called Big Easy in 1911 that burnt down. Now, I think somebody somehow possibly remembered that, but I think in the 1960s, it was spread by an African-American radio station, WYLD. and they played music, and a lot of people listened to that. You remember you had limited television at the time. They'd play the radio station in bars all the time. And I think they used the term Big Easy on that radio station. I think one disc jockey, probably Groovy Gus, on that radio station called it the Big Easy. Now, later in 1973, I found an interview with a disc jockey of WYLD. He said they were prohibited from using the term Crescent City. The manager said, don't use the term Crescent City. We don't like that term. Didn't say they were using Big Easy, but says we're not using Crescent City. So I think Big Easy was used on WYLD. So what I would like to do is to publicize my findings in New Orleans. I was able to get it printed in Big Easy magazine. Nobody reads that, but it's just a small blog. It's not the daily newspaper. It's not the television. It's not the radio. But that's the story of the Big Easy. I think it came from that bar and was popularized by a radio DJ.
That's fascinating. I think so many. First of all, I'm so impressed that you can just sit here and rattle that off. Steve and I can't get through 2 sentences without saying, "Oh my gosh, we flubbed that up with our note." Let me look at my notes. So I'm just, very impressed by that.
Two major American cities, and people could help me by digitizing these works, by digitizing these newspapers. Not very expensive. Mayor Bloomer could write a check. Lots of people could just write a check. I've done as much work as I can. It's up to other people to help.
Well, we will, when we publish this episode, we're gonna put some places on the website that if you want to do something, call this person, mail this.
Some calls to action for it.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll do that for sure because
you know what I appreciate too, Barry, is you've talked about we're in Richmond, Virginia, and by the time this airs, there's some statues being removed down here. But I like the fact that you come to this with a positive way of not just here's some stuff that should come down, here's some things that should go up. Yeah. Here are good reasons for stuff to go up. People have invented phrases and words that aren't getting credit for it. There are things we use every day and are, not just backwater references to something. It's New York City's nickname. I mean, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. And Steve, you're reading my mind because I'm sitting here. Yeah, we're in Richmond and I'm going, you know what? We got the Arthur Ashe. Like maybe we can be known for, even though it's the Big Easy is not in Richmond, is not Richmond, obviously, and the Big Apple is not, we can be known for that. But, it is interesting, though, how I think we forget it's one of the things Steve and I have learned through all this is how one influential person, whether it be a DJ, whether it be an actor or writer or somebody just says something, especially back years ago, and it catches on because there weren't as many options as there are now. Things, obviously things are still getting coined every day, as we know from your Twitter feed and everywhere else. But and the other thing I thought was interesting about what you just said was we have also found how much does come from African American slang, Black slang, and then gets picked up by like hippies or something, I mean, really, like we've seen that trend happen a bunch of times, especially in the 60s, where it was like, who Janis Joplin goes on Dick Cavett and says ripped off, which was a term that was, I guess, Black slang. And next thing you know, it's like sweeping the country, but it's all just so fascinating. So that was fascinating about the Big Easy. Are there any that I'm sure there are a million, but off the top of your head, do you have any words or phrases that you just haven't been able to get anywhere with and you're still super curious about?
Your white whale that you've been hunting down for years.
There's a bunch. The origin of Dallas, Texas, the origin of Idaho. Idaho is very interesting. I don't know which one you want to talk. Dallas is very interesting. I was profiled in the Dallas Morning News. They just liked my stuff. They found me by accident, and I said, "By the way, I'm working on Dallas." And they said, "Oh, that's great. We'll publish that." And so I didn't really solve it, unfortunately, like I did with the Big Apple and the Big Easy. But Dallas is something I'm known for as well. We don't know who coined Dallas, where it comes from. That's the problem. In 1845. Polk was the president. His vice president was George Mifflin Dallas of Pennsylvania. a very prominent statesman. Dallas was an old family. And we know that in Texas, they have a Polk County and they have a Dallas County. Polk was named after the president. Dallas County, Dallas was named after the vice president. So that's very clear. We know that the county was named after the vice president in 1845. The problem here is that the city of Dallas is from 1841, and he was not vice president at that time. So
I hate when that happens.
Was it named after the same guy? Now, his father was named, I believe, Alexander Dallas, was Secretary of the Treasury. So he was very, and he had one son, of course, was George Mifflin Dallas, who became vice president. The other son was Commodore A.J. Dallas. And a lot of people said it was named after Commodore Dallas, which was the brother, which was another Dallas. So which Dallas was it named after? We don't know. Unfortunately, they didn't really have Twitter at the time in the 1840s. They didn't really have newspapers. Dallas was a very, very small city. Supposedly, John Neely Bryan, who was the founder of Dallas, said, I named it after my friend Dallas. And his friend Dallas, he had no idea who George Mifflin Dallas was in Pennsylvania. That was not his friend. There were many other people. Supposedly, he might have known Commodore Dallas because Commodore Dallas supposedly ran ships in the Gulf of Mexico. So we think it might have been him. So that's one thing I would like to solve that I haven't. Now, I know that in 1870 or so, one book said, it's Commodore Dallas. The city was named after him. That's the guy. Unfortunately, like a year later, they said, George Mifflin Dallas, that's the guy. So whether we believe this account or that account. Now, the one which said George Mifflin Dallas, that was supposedly by Mabel Gilbert, one of the first settlers, and his wife. And his wife came from Pennsylvania, and supposedly John Neely Bryan said, you can name the town. And Mabel said, well, I'll name it after Dallas. And so that's the popular story. Whether that's true or not, I know I can't say. Another, there was a family was called Beeman, John Beeman. And he, in the Dallas Morning News in about 1903, I think it was either John Beeman or his son, said also it's from George Mifflin Dallas. So I have two sources that say it's George Mifflin Dallas. One says it's Alexander J. Dallas. And then there were other people named Dallas as well. So who knows? So that is a big mystery. The other mystery I've been working on is the state of Idaho, where the name Idaho comes from. Supposedly it meant a gem of the mountains, and it was not Idaho. Idaho did not begin in Idaho. Idaho actually began in Colorado, and it was Pikes Peak. And they had mountains around there, and they said, what should we call this land? Oh, let's call it Idaho. And it was not voted down. Supposedly, the person promoting this said it was a Native American word, which it wasn't. And it supposedly meant gem of the mountains, which he supposedly made up. So it was not called Idaho, it was called Colorado. However, people liked the term Idaho anyway. And there was a ship called Idaho. And later, Idaho was the state of Idaho was named Idaho. So they took that name and said, well, it's not good enough for Colorado, but it's good enough for us. But the whole question is, where does the name Idaho come from? Is it an Indian name or not? What? Oh, okay, sorry. Isn't it an Indian name or not? And so that's another mystery I'm trying to work on. I have theories about that it's not an Indian. Well, Indian, they have the names like Arapaho or whatever. They're common. Ho endings were common with Indians, so that's a popular term. But I had a theory that it's maybe Horace Greeley's daughter. Horace Greeley was a newspaper publisher, published the New York Tribune. And it was a very popular paper at the time. He visited what was then called, what's now called Colorado. And in fact, there's a town in Colorado called Greeley, Colorado, and it's named after Horace Greeley. He had a daughter named Ida. So I think it might be his daughter, Idaho, that's just one theory, that because he was there at the time. What happened was, you go to the newspapers at the time, you look all around. You look not only and you just say, you get the tenor of it. What do people, and then one word works into another. One thought works into another. And one thing is connected to another. So you look through a year of newspapers. That's why the digitizing newspapers is okay if you look, if you're looking for something and you find it, but occasionally you find stuff you're not looking for at all. And that's the thing. So Idaho is another thing that I haven't been able to solve really is Canuck. Why people in Canada are called Canucks. I came close with that. I found citations from the 1830s. The only problem, I mean, I found spellings Canuck with a C. I found spellings Canuck with a K. I found Canuck with Canuck. People say it's from Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islanders. They were called Canuckers or Canucks. I don't know about that. People say it's from the Indians or Native Americans. Who knows? I mean, and that's another one I'm still working on.
Yeah. Well, do you think sometimes some of these things survive just because of the way they sound? They have a good ring to it. I mean, Canuck, Idaho, they're sort of, or maybe they seem that way to me because I've heard them for so long. But it feels like the Idaho, they're all fascinating. The Idaho one is fascinating to me. We have a what would you call it? A bypass or a highway around here called the Powhite Parkway. We have some people that call it Powhite and say it comes from, what do they call? Not Indian, but
Native American.
Thank you, Native American. And then you have other people that say no, it's Powhite. It's Powhite people that I haven't done any research on it, right? But there are different. When it sounds like it could be a Native American thing, it tends to. It's just like you get a lot of things where people say, "Oh, that was a nautical term for this." I think sometimes when people aren't sure, they just throw out Native American or nautical. But Canuck just sounds cool though. So I'm not surprised. I mean, who knows where it came from? I guess, but
and I believe that would be Native Canadian.
Yes.
Make sure we're politically correct. Thank you. I don't want to offend anyone.
Hey Barry, how are you doing on time? I got like 2 more questions if you've got time for that.
Whatever.
Okay. So I think that really Steve and I could probably do this forever and just throw out a word or phrase and have you go. But I wanted to ask you about the joke thing. So like
jokes.
We've used your jokes on our like Steve and always giving credit. So we're going to end this on one of your jokes. When did that come about? You're usually either posting like I don't know if you're coming up with a lot of these or you're citing them from other places. And is the idea to give the origin of the jokes or is it just how did that start?
Well, I always liked jokes. The thing is that the Oxford English Dictionary, they have words. The Historical Dictionary of Slang, they've got words. I have a friend who does phrases, quotations, but jokes, nobody does. Nobody does the origin of jokes. Nobody knows where they come from. I was raised in the 1970s. We went up to the Catskills. And of course, that was the end of the Catskills. And people have the jokes like "try the veal." That's on my website.
Right.
Thank you, your wonderful audience. Try the veal. It's like,
by the way, Steve, new podcast idea: origin of jokes. Just keep that in mind. But I'm sorry. But you're right. Nobody does it. I never even thought about it until I saw you posting. I'm like, oh, I've never thought about this, but it's so interesting. Like somebody had to come up with it. And by the way, comedians now. I mean, boy, you steal somebody's joke, that can cause a real rift. So they need to go to barrypopik.com, I guess, and see you start. But please proceed.
So what I did is, all the Rodney Dangerfield, all the Woody Allen, like Woody Allen, he said like, we need the eggs. I don't know if you remember that joke. Remember that joke? We need the eggs. It was Annie Hall. It was Annie.
Oh. Annie
Hall, and he says, my son, he thinks he's a chicken. It's like whatever, and he thinks he's a chicken. Well, you got to get him cured. No, we need the eggs. So but actually, Woody Allen did not come up with that joke. That's an old Jewish joke. They have all these old Jewish jokes, and people say them, and people don't. Where do they come from? Well, we can find out because we have historical citations now. What I do is I go through Reddit jokes all the time. There was a joke just the other day, but sometimes they're not just jokes; they're cultural parts of our heritage. Like the joke here today is, what's the difference between a cop and a bullet? Or what's the difference between a police officer and a bullet?
I don't know. What is?
A bullet gets fired after it kills you, or something like that.
Oh my God.
That cops don't get fired.
That's timely.
I mean, that's not. I mean, that's a little funny, but that tells about our culture in America, right? At this time, that got 70,000 likes, at least 70,000 likes on Reddit jokes. The cop bullet police brutality joke. So it's a joke and it's funny, but it tells us something about who we are. So I go through Reddit jokes every day. I go through Reddit dad jokes. The problem about Reddit dad jokes is that you get like 1,000 contributors every day. They repeat the same joke all the time. So every joke I've ever done on my entire website will be on Reddit dad jokes every single day. And people not realizing that, you know, it's been on this site every day for 10 years. You can stop telling me a joke for a week. That's a problem. But no, I go through Reddit jokes, Reddit dad jokes. I go through Reddit 3 a.m. jokes. I go through Reddit one-liners. I go through Reddit shower thoughts. Then I go to Facebook. There's a bunch of Facebook groups. Unfortunately, the Facebook groups are a lot of it's with memes. A lot of it is visual stuff that really doesn't translate to my website. And a lot of it is sexual stuff, which just, oh, come on. This is not a joke. This is not a pun. This is just whatever. But, you know, that gets mixed in with that. So, you know, I do a lot of Reddit, a lot of the Facebook stuff. Occasionally, what I would do is I just go into Google News and type in old joke. I type in quotes, old joke, and it would say this is like an old joke, and I just say, oh well, that's one I haven't done, and although I've done just about everyone by now, but yeah.
But basically though, you're still you're researching and finding where did these originate, in the same manner that you're doing your research for. Yeah, it's a great idea because it's that's something that I had never heard of, and what I want to know is where you get the energy, because Steven, you're getting the doing the jokes, you're doing the words, you're doing all that stuff. And then to switch gears, you know, I did want to ask you how things are going. I know you're always busy, as you said. How has your sort of work life, I mean, everybody's life has changed, but without, you know, being stuck in the house, or do you normally work in the house anyway? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I normally work in the house. We have 2 kids, and they are 10 and 12. Well, the 10 is about to turn 11 this month, and then 12. And my wife, and you know, we try to. Well, lately, we've been doing schoolwork with them, but mainly my wife, and you know, just try to put food on the table, and try to take a vacation once in a while. Although we can't do that anymore. I used to be a lawyer. I stopped that. What happened was I was hospitalized 3 times. I was hospitalized in 2011, 2013, and 2018 with Crohn's disease. The 2018 was very serious. I was hospitalized for a month, and I had a major operation. The other one, they removed an abscess and whatever. I got blood transfusions in 2013 and 2018. So I don't know. Crohn's disease could come back anytime. So you never know how long you have to live. So I do as much as I can. I try to do 10 entries every day, which is hard. I used to. I said, what will I do? Maybe I'll do 5 entries. Maybe I'll. But lately with the coronavirus thing, I just said, okay, let's do 10. Other people do 1 a day. And they're fine. They have a joke a day. I try to do 10. After this broadcast, I'll try to do another one. Heroes work here. I'll work on that phrase. That's not a joke.
Oh, yeah.
That's a saying. But, that's stuff. I mean, this is stuff you will not find it in the Oxford English Dictionary.
Right.
You will not find it in dictionary with slang, but it's something people say, and people saying, where does that come from? Heroes work here. Where did that originate? And of course, they won't find my website because Google does not help me, but well, what can you do? Like even Big Apple is not in the first 10 pages of Google.
Really?
Everyone uses my work for free. Everybody uses there's no one at Google to talk to. I said, Google, you know who I am. My website has almost 25,000 entries.
Right.
I do as best as I can. Each individual entry, where it comes from, at least 5 to 10 sites every entry. Obviously, some entries are better than others, but for Big Apple, I should definitely be on the first page. But that's not up to me.
Well, we'll see what we can do to keep the word out there, because you are the Big Apple expert as far as we're concerned. We're not going to, and we ever meet anybody at Google, if anyone actually lives there or works there, which who knows?
The robots have taken over.
And it's not just Google. It's Bing too. And you think DuckDuckGo is better, but they're not. For example, on coronavirus, I have over 530 entries on coronavirus.
Wow.
530. And you type in corona jokes, and the first thing on DuckDuckGo is a site with 28 jokes. And you go 20. It's like, what?
I don't know how any of this works either. But I will tell you, for what it's worth. I mean, all kidding aside, man, we appreciate you a lot, and it's like a huge deal to have you on. And I know that there are other people, especially now, and not to get all philosophical, but in this time where it is kind of hard to know what's true, what are you getting fed? I know that if I go to your website, you have vetted it. It's, and if you're not sure, you're going to say you're not sure. You're not going to put some stupid. But I mean, for example, going back to your Dallas, research. I mean, it's like you have so much there that I think that most people would go ahead and this is what, but you're not sure. You haven't vetted it to the point where you say, this is it. But then when you do have the Big Apple and what you have for the Big Easy, it's like, hey, you want to get it out there. So we do too. And we appreciate that so much.
And Scott, if I could say to you, Barry, thank you for what you're doing right now, because 10 years from now, we'll be able to look back. You're live documenting what's going on during coronavirus times, that when, memory and nostalgia 10 years from now, starts to change things, we'll be able to look back and say, no, we know who said that because somebody we trust put that down. So we appreciate you doing that work also with that.
Well, thanks to you. In fact, you're the first interview I've given, so it's up to you.
All right.
Well, we really appreciate it. Don't want to take up too much of your time. If you're listening to this, I would highly recommend going to barrypopik.com if you want to know anything about the history of words, phrases, jokes. If somebody's trying to rip off your joke, or let Barry know, and he'll document it for you. Barry, it's been a huge pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Barry.
And thank you for go ahead, please.
Also, various types of jokes. I'm an expert on bar jokes. Bar jokes. And of course, the bar joke now is a priest and a rabbi and a minister can't go into a bar. Something like that.
You know what, Steve? We like your bar jokes. Steve has used one of your bar jokes on one of our episodes.
Yeah.
Also, light bulb jokes. How many, whatever it takes to screw in a light bulb. That's a popular joke. And cross the road jokes. Chicken cross the road jokes. Why did the chicken cross the road? To socially distance.
Right. That's good. See, these are funny.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
Are you before now I'm curious about this. Are you compiling, are you writing any of these jokes? Are these just all what you're gathering and documenting? Because I feel like you have a good sense of humor where you could be writing some of these.
I could write some of the jokes, but I don't. I basically take them, and if they have a bunch of citations, I go with it. In fact, my wife says, here's a term, you got to put it in your website. I said, I can't do that. You got to have like 5 or 6 citations. It's got to be like in newspaper or something. I can't just, and it could be wonderful, but I don't. Occasionally, I put something in that I just personally like that maybe it's not as popular as anything, but like if it's a food joke, I'm an expert in food jokes, and it's a particular food, and maybe not everyone gets the joke, or maybe it's not as. But if it's a particular food, especially if it's a hot dog, because I'm known for the hot dog.
Yes.
Maybe it's not the best joke in the world. I put it in. For example, this is a music joke. I have lots of music jokes. Oh boy, and about every musical instrument, about drummers, about guitarists, about pianists, about everything. In fact, my uncle used to have this joke. This is an old Jewish joke. A guy's going for an operation on his hands, and they said, will I be able to play piano after the operation? And the doctor says, oh, sure, you'll be able to play piano. No problem. They said, that's great. I couldn't play it before.
That's good.
So that's an old joke. One joke is, what's the coronavirus's favorite composer? And it was, Drykovsky, like Tchaikovsky, Drykovsky. And that's like, okay, that's funny. That was on Twitter, got 192,000 likes. 192,000 likes. So if something is like that on Twitter and I see it's like, oh, this is getting 190, or if it's like on Reddit jokes and it gets 30,000 likes, it's on my website.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's and not to get back to the Google search thing because it is confounding, but people want to know where this stuff comes from. I mean, it's the you mentioned bar jokes and some of those, and our podcast originated from some guy at a bar that I was at a bar, and a guy said to me, "I like the cut of your jib," and I just was like, "What in the world does that mean?" Like, I know what it means. I know what he's saying, but I have no clue what the origin of that is. And I had been thinking about doing a podcast. Steve and I have been talking about it, and it was like, oh. I bet other people are curious about these things too, right? Yeah. And that's sort of what I think what you're doing is very valuable because people are curious about these things. But yeah, the jokes are actually pretty funny. And so like Steve said, we're going to have this record of, it's going to look like right now, it kind of seems, okay, we're all saying the same jokes. And even 20 years from now, some of this stuff out of context, we're going to go, why in the world are we talking about heroes' work here? What does that even mean? What heroes? What makes you this job a hero? Well, back in 2020, let me tell you, if you were working at a grocery store, you were a hero, right? So it's fantastic. So we love it. Is there anywhere else that people? I mean, obviously we've talked about the website a lot. That's a good place to go. Anything else that you would like to put out there, other than, like I said, Species.com? We will. Click on this episode link and we'll have some other information about how you can spread the word about Big Easy, Big Apple, and anything else Barry is passionate about.
No,
I don't sell anything. I don't have a Patreon page, which maybe I should, but I don't. I don't have any Big Apple t-shirts to sell. I don't have pins. I don't have a Big Easy t-shirt. There's no product line. There's nothing. I can't say click on the ads because no, don't do that. I can't. There's nothing. I give out my work for free.
We appreciate it.
We appreciate it very much. And again, thank you. We've taken up a good chunk of your time tonight, and we know you have many more posts and things to put out there tonight. So we will be on and liking and sharing. So Barry Popik, one more time, I want to say thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir.
If hopefully we can have you on again sometime, if this wasn't too horrible for you, we'd love to do that.
Oh, plenty. And then I got to explain the Windy City. Plenty more
stuff.
There we go. All right, there we go.
Hey, I
tease for the next time.
Windy City and hot dog, maybe something like that. All right. Well, with that, we're going to let you go. Thank you, Barry, very much. All right. That was our interview with Barry Popik. Be sure to check out barrypopik.com for all your etymology and joke needs. Also, go to species.com and click on the episode page for more information on how you can help Barry fight the good fight with the Big Apple and the Big Easy. This has been our last episode of Season 3, and it's been a really fantastic season. Thank you very much for being a part of it. We have a lot of cool stuff coming up for Season 4, so if you're not already subscribed, make sure you do so at the podcast provider of your choice so you don't miss us when we come back in September. You can also go to Species.com/shows for our other projects like True Facts with Robert Banquette, Panic at the Costco, and Personal Records, which is about to come back with new episodes. From Steve and me, thanks so much for listening, and as always, watch out for bears.
Species.
My name is Scott McGinnis, and you may know me as one of the hosts of Origin of Species, but I want to tell you about another podcast I host called Personal Records. On Personal Records, I chat with people about an album that has been important to them. Sometimes we break it down track by track, and other times we talk more about how that album, or even just music in general, has been important in their lives. New episodes of Personal Records will be released starting on June 25th. If you love music like I do and my guests do, subscribe now at the podcast provider of your choice so you don't miss an episode.